I'm really honored that you gave me this opportunity to speak about ways to be more inclusive for our LGBTQIA folks.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I think I've gotten such a wealth of information that I myself am learning, and I hope that everyone who is watching this discussion is also learning quite a bit that they can later implement with their teams. Tell me a bit about Henderson PD and what your position entails there.
Sure. So I am the administrator of professional standards and accountability. So I'm a civilian who is the head of internal affairs and critical incident review. And then I'll also be taking on accreditation in the near future.
As it relates to Pride Month, I've definitely seen where your page, well, your forward-facing elements of Henderson PD definitely have been in alignment with Pride Month, which I wanted to definitely jump in and say that kudos to you, your team, for being able to have a stance, a very clear stance and a clear message on that front. So I also wanted to mention that to you guys as well.
Thank you.
Could you describe the current relationship your agency has with the LGBTQIA community?
Sure. So, it's hard to gauge, what a community within your community feels about your police department because generally the loudest voices are negative in general, and that goes, for all sub communities. But I think that our relationship with the LGBTQIA community in Henderson is better than it was 5 years ago, and hopefully not as good as it will be 5 years from now. We really strive as an organization to put out the message that we serve every member of our community, no matter what your race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability, disability. We really try to be cognizant that we're giving everyone appropriate and equal service. But we are aware that there has been a historical distrust of law enforcement by the LGBTQIA community, and that distrust has been born out of negative interactions between law enforcement and LGBTQIA people. And that's based on criminalization of LGBTQIA existence and sexual relationships and societal misunderstandings about gender identity and about sexuality. So we know that our agency has made progress in improving those relationships with our LGBTQIA community by taking affirmative steps to repair perceptions, but that there's a lot of room for improvement. So we've taken a few steps, and so one of those steps is that we have designated a PD-specific diversity liaison. So this is a sworn member of our agency whose he has a job, a daytime job, but part of his duties are to communicate concerns of the LGBTQIA community, concerns of employees that are members of that group and citizens that are part of that community to the administration and to training and to recruitment and to whatever the appropriate entity is. So we've got that designated person so that when someone comes to our community or to our agency and wants to speak to someone who they know is a safe person to speak to, we have a person designated to do that. Our city of Henderson, Nevada, has set up a diversity, equity, and inclusion coalition. And that coalition is a group of volunteer employees who spend anywhere between 2 to 4 hours a week of their work time with the city's blessing and approval to work on inclusion and diversity, equity initiatives for the city. So they listen to what city employees are giving in feedback of what the city could do better to be more inclusive, to promote diversity and equity. And they initiate, create, drive these initiatives to make our city a better place. And as a PD, we really encourage our employees to participate in that coalition. I'm actually one of the co-leads of that coalition for the entire city. So I spend a lot of my work time working on citywide efforts for diversity and inclusion. We also applied for a rating on the Human Rights Campaign Municipal Equality Index. The Human Rights Campaign has this program where they come in and evaluate your city based on a list of criteria about how inclusive your laws are, how inclusive your employment is. And so we applied for it a few years ago, got a 57, not a great score. And so we started working on the criteria that they set forth, and we're proud to say that this year we got 100. So we have really improved over the last 5 years. In addition to that, we have several local nonprofits in our area that advocate for the LGBTQIA community. And we have put members from those nonprofits on our Citizens Advisory Board. So this is an advisory board that meets with our chief directly. It includes, faith leaders in our community, business leaders in our community, and nonprofit leaders in our community. And so we put LGBTQIA members on that committee so that they can communicate directly with our chief and let him know what their struggles are and what issues they're having with our police force at any given time. Perhaps the most important thing is outreach in our community, and we've taken a lot of steps for that. We participate directly in Pride events and festivals when they pop up, not only in Henderson, but in Las Vegas that has more festivals. They're a larger agency and a larger city right next to us. We put up social media posts for Pride Month and other individual days throughout the year, Trans Day of Visibility, National Coming Out Day. We post supportive posts on social media during those times. We conduct directed recruitment efforts at job fairs, at NAT festivals to try to encourage members of the LGBTQIA community to apply for our agency. And we have attended several events at our local equality center where we can, for example, we had a turkey day where members of the police department donated turkeys for Thanksgiving and showed up on the day to give out to members of the community. So just looking for those sorts of events where you can have one-on-one contact with the community. And then of course, education and training. Diversity training is really essential, including specific LGBTQIA sensitivity training in our academy.
The next question I had for you is, in your opinion, what improvements have been made in the law enforcement community as it relates to protecting and serving those in the LGBTQIA community?
So I think the first thing that maybe has happened nationwide is that agencies have started to conduct training. I'm not going to say it's the best training that I've seen in my time in being part of a law enforcement agency, but there is training that's taking place. And considering that 10 years ago, agencies didn't see any reason to conduct LGBTQIA specific diversity training, I think that's a step in the right direction. We've partnered with an agency called Out to Protect, which is, they produce an LGBTQ specific component in our academy that's not required by our police officer standards, our post. And so I think that there's opportunity for improvement there, but that is something that law enforcement has begun to realize is something that's needed. And I think progressive agencies have started listening to society in general, which I think is huge. As negative media pops up across the country about things that happen at various agencies, we're starting to listen and to learn from the mistakes of others, and that's huge. There's been a sense in law enforcement, historically that we're the good guys, we're the right, and we are the good guys, but we also have to listen to our critics and grow and change with the times. So that's begun, but there's a long way to go.
I agree with you on that one. It's great to be able to have those first baby steps in terms of having the conversation. That's probably the first step, and then being able to listen to the community and get active feedback. And so with that being said, what else do you think needs to be done with?
Well, I think that the first thing that needs to be done is that agencies have to be willing to acknowledge the real or perceived harms that law enforcement has done to the LGBTQIA community historically. So you have to acknowledge that within the lifetime of many people in our community and many people in our agency, police were raiding gay bars and LGBTQIA safe spaces and establishments, and police were perpetrating violence on the community by actively enforcing so-called morality laws that basically criminalized the existence of gay people and trans people and other queer people in the community. So you have to start with that acknowledgement, because if you don't acknowledge that, there can't be trust. And you also have to acknowledge that while things aren't as bad as they were, in 1969 when the Stonewall riots happened, that even in the last 10 years, LGBTQIA folks experience violence at much higher rates than people in the cisgender and heterosexual communities. So when they report crime, they still experience levels of disrespect from the officers that are coming to take their complaints. So a lot of people in this community still, when they experience violence, wonder whether they should bother calling the police, because are they just going to re-victimize themselves by having someone who doesn't know anything about them or their community come up and make fun of what they're wearing, or make fun of their relationship, or belittle their experience. So we have to acknowledge that societal treatment, not just in law enforcement, but societal treatment of LGBTQIA folks has caused people in the LGBTQIA community at higher rates to enter sex work. So we have to acknowledge that our police are having negative interactions with people in this community because of the way society has treated them, not because of who they are as people. So when you take that into account, when you take the societal history and the law enforcement specific history into account, your agency to move forward has to be willing to take some amount of responsibility to say, like, we acknowledge this, we know it's a problem, and we're going to move forward and we're going to do better. And so that's a starting point, because there can be no progress without starting to build levels of trust. So that's where you have to focus if you're getting started. And then you have to move to education, and the education can never stop. It's not a one-time class in the academy or one in-service training. It has to be continuous, and you have to start from baby steps. So we acknowledge that a lot of the folks that are drawn to law enforcement are people from fairly conservative communities who perhaps haven't had a lot of contact with LGBTQIA people or lifestyles. So you have to start with the basics when you're training. You have to start with vocabulary. You have to explain what words like cisgender and transgender mean, and that transgender is not a noun. You can't call people transgenders. You have to start with those basics of learning vocabulary and being respectful in your communication. And then you can go to educating on ways to show respect when communicating with that community. And you have to move to, after you educate your officers and your sworn and your professional staff who are going to interact with the public, you have to move to showing employees how to reframe their attitudes. Because if you have people who have negative attitudes on your force, and we all do, towards members of the LGBTQIA community, they have to reframe that in a way that it's not going to be coming out when they're speaking with members of the community. So after you educate members of your force, you then have to educate your community that you're making efforts. Because if your community doesn't know, there's still going to be a level of distrust, and that level of distrust leads members of the community to interact negatively with your officers. So you have to educate the community about what you're doing. And so obviously you can start with enforcement of hate crimes. You can start actively pursuing criminal investigations of hate crimes. You can put up stickers, signs, social media posts where you're describing your agency as a safe place for LGBTQIA folks. They know what that means, safe space. So you put the safe space signs up, they know that, hey, this community is making efforts, so I'm gonna give this a chance. You also have to make sure that you're your officers are taking more everyday crimes like domestic violence more seriously between LGBTQIA folks. So, honestly, historically, when officers have shown up on a scene and there's a gay couple having a domestic violence incident, it's been taken less seriously than it should have been if it was a cisgender couple. So a cisgender straight heterosexual couple. So we want to be sure that the community knows that we're taking those crimes seriously. And then you have to educate the community that things are changing by participating in those pride events, participating in those festivals, and being present and visible at your equality centers and your LGBTQIA centers, so that they know, okay, I have had a negative interaction with a police officer, but now I've had a positive interaction with a police officer. So you have to start putting things on the other side of the scale so that you can tip those scales in your favor.
Why is it important that leaders actively address discrimination at the agency level?
So I think the first reason that that's important is because discrimination is illegal. So we have to address it, because if we're not, law enforcement agencies are government agencies, and we cannot be engaging in discrimination against our employees or discrimination against the public. Police agencies cannot continue to think of themselves as being above the law. So, the law is you can't discriminate against people. So we have to address discrimination at agency levels. And continuing to turn a blind eye towards discrimination in your agency opens your agency to liability. It's dangerous for your agency. So addressing it now avoids employment lawsuits by LGBTQIA members of your agency that maybe are out or not out, but they're experiencing harassment from their coworkers just by disrespectful conversations taking place or teasing. It will help your agency avoid equal protection or civil rights lawsuits by members of the community. Addressing discrimination will, or failing to address discrimination, puts your agency at risk of going under a consent decree. All you need is one bad event to take place that makes the national media to get the DOJ's attention directed at your agency. So addressing discrimination before it becomes a larger problem can help you stay out of a consent decree. And hand in hand with that, it puts your agency at risk for negative media coverage when you fail to address discrimination, which ultimately, anytime we have an officer event that goes viral, it puts your officers at risk. It lessens officer safety. It lessens officer effectiveness because members of the community are more suspicious of officers because of what they've seen on TV. It lessens cooperation from the public, so the public's less willing to give us information or tips because they don't know how they're going to be treated. And that contributes to higher crime rates, and it makes your employees feel unsafe. So it really is in everyone's best interest to handle discrimination and address it as quickly and as immediately as possible. Now, addressing it, we know, on a case-by-case basis won't fix all your problems, but it'll show your community and your employees that you're trying, that you're taking those steps. And just that effort of trying helps build credibility, so that if or when something bad does happen, you've built up a little bit of credit. You've got a little bit of money in the bank, so to speak, so that, folks can say, well, I did see that video and it was alarming, but I've also interacted with Officer Jones and Smith at the Pride Parade, and I know that not all police are like that. So it's important to address it so that you build that credibility with the community.
What advice would you give to law enforcement leaders looking to establish trust within the LGBTQIA communities they serve?
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. Obviously, every community and every agency is different in its community attitudes and its community relationships. But a good place to start is that Human Rights Campaign Municipal Equality Index that I mentioned, and it's really easy. If you Google HRC Municipal Equality Index, you can see other cities that have gone through this process that we've gone through. But the criteria, you get scored, and then you get your criteria back, and that it gives you very specific things that need to take place in your city. And a lot of those things that need to take place in your city are police specific, because police are such a big part of the city's interaction with the public. So, for example, that diversity liaison that we have, the idea for that was born out of the Human Rights Campaign Municipal Equality Index, and it's been a really productive and valuable addition to our staff. So I think agencies should go through that process, as painful as it can be. It's not a very taxing process, but it's really eye-opening to see, and they can really help you identify what areas that you can find improvements. So that's a really good place to start. And whether you go with a diversity liaison or just appoint someone in your agency to be cognizant of diversity, they can be a full-time or a part-time person. They can be someone who works full-time for your agency but only does the diversity stuff part-time. I know smaller agencies don't have the money to designate a full-time employee to this, but just having someone in your agency who can communicate effectively on these types of issues, and can feel safe to employees who may be having struggles, or members of the community, will help you make big strides. As I've talked about already, law enforcement agencies have to be visible, and they have to be actively engaged at LGBTQIA events in their communities. So when possible, participate in the Pride Parade. Don't just be the law enforcement at the Pride Parade, but march in the parade. And I'll caveat that saying that some communities have recently prohibited police officers in uniform from marching in Pride parades. And I know that is due to that historical distrust, and that they don't want police there, but they'll let you be there, just not in uniform. So if that's how you have to start, and you have to take baby steps, then that's how you have to start. But you have to go, and you have to make those efforts. But in addition to going to those big, high profile events, you can just let your employees know that they need to make frequent stop-ins at your local nonprofits and equality centers, and have stop-ins for positive interactions. Stop in and make sure everybody's okay, make sure things are going well. We all know that officers have some time when they're out on the road that maybe there's not an active call. When you have that time, stop in at the equality center of your area, your LGBTQ center, and make sure things are good, and start building and forming those relationships. Advertise opportunities to do ride-alongs, or citizen academies, or youth programs. I know here we do all of those things. We let any citizen in our community do ride-alongs if they schedule it appropriately, and we have a citizen academy, and we have youth programs, and we have a Camp 911 where people can come in and really get the basics of everything our agency does. So when you advertise those things specifically to a specific community, then that community, maybe some of them will take you up on your offer, and will come in and not only learn about the good work that you're doing at your agency, but can start forming positive relationships. And I will go as far as to say, when members of your agency get to interact with people in the community, they realize that they're people. It goes a long way on both sides to form those relationships. I think a huge thing that you can do, and this is something that I've started doing here, is to look at your policies and procedures. All of us law enforcement agencies have extensive policies and procedures that we go by. There are our law in our book for how we do our jobs. Go through your policies and procedures and look for opportunities to change them to be more inclusive and more equitable. So, for example, we recently changed our grooming and uniform standards policy so that it wasn't gendered. So previously, historically, it said, women can have ponytails and men have to have hair, above the collar, and it can't touch the ears. And, there's all these specific standards that are by gender. Well, when you have a person who's non-binary or transgender come into your organization as an employee, they don't know where they fit. There's no policy for them. So you need to degenderize your policies. And that can feel very confusing to people in leadership, I know, but I assure you it can be done, and it can be done in an effective way that still promotes a professional appearance to the public. So look through those policies, and if you don't have someone on your team that understands how to be inclusive, then bring in members of your community to help with that. In addition to looking at your policies and procedures, you can look at little things to help in the community. So include your pronouns on your business card, on your name tag, on your email signature, and encourage your employees to do so. Normalize or put into policy asking for a citizen's pronouns before you interact with them, for everybody, not just people where you're like, I can't really figure out if this person is intending to present as male or female. Then don't just ask that person, ask everyone. Hi, my name is Officer Hanks, and I go by she, her pronouns. What are your pronouns? And that will go a long way towards making people feel comfortable. We recommend having workplace transition guidelines in place. So we worked with our HR department to come up with workplace transitioning guidelines for the whole city, so that as our transgender employees feel safe enough to come out and make transitions at work, there's already a procedure in place. It's publicly posted, it's prominently posted, so that our trans employees know, hey, if you want to do this and you're ready to do this, we've got a plan. We're not judging, we're accepting you from the get-go. And work with your benefits business partners to know if your healthcare packages cover gender affirming healthcare, medical care. That's huge for your employees too, and it's something that you can advertise as you're doing recruitment. So, not only for employees, but for employees' children. I'll share that I have a transgender child, and it was made a big difference in my life to know that our city does support that. So it's important to have that in your healthcare package. Just enacting policies that explicitly affirm the acceptance of members of the LGBTQIA community. And it can be as simple as saying, we affirm the existence of LGBTQIA members, and we're going to treat them with respect and dignity. So policy review can be huge. There's a lot of opportunities there. You can include information on your internal affairs and your other citizen complaint websites and intake procedures on how to best report discrimination. When agencies are actively going out there saying, hey, we want to know, we want to hear your feedback on discrimination, that's messages, that sends a message to the community that you're safe, that you're open, that you want to hear the feedback. So that's a good opportunity too. We've already talked a lot about training, but I feel like I can't say it enough. You've got to do training, and it can't be the one-time training. It's got to be continuous. It's got to be in the academy. It's got to be LGBTQIA specific. And then it's like I said, it's got to start with basic vocabulary and then progress through attitude shifts. And so, a lot of feedback and pushback that we get sometimes from our recruits or that we've heard about from other agencies is that a lot of police say, well, that lifestyle or the transgender people are against my religion. That's against my religion. And you have to be ready for that. You have to remind people that you work for the government. And so the government cannot discriminate. So you have to leave your religious beliefs at the door and work for your employer. And that's hard for a lot of people, but you have to be able to help people shift their mindsets. And that can only be done through training and exposure. So it can't be one time, it's got to be continuous. And if you have a good trainer, then that trainer can go into really specifics about some of the specific dangers that are out there for LGBTQIA people. So for example, the dangers of outing a trans person who may be living stealth. And for those that don't know what that means, some trans people identified really young as trans, and they have taken their hormone treatments, and no one knows, they may be in a group of people who don't know that they're transgender. And if you pull them over, for example, and they hand you their ID, and their ID has a name that doesn't fit the gender that they're expressing as, continuing to question them about that may put them in danger in their friend group that they're in the car with or with the people that they're around. So just being cognizant of things like that. I know in Nevada, our state legislature has passed a law that allows people to change the gender on their birth certificate and driver's license to X. So it's neither male nor female. And I know other states have taken those steps as well. So you've got to educate your officers about that because that's a relatively new law. It's 4 or 5 years old. So you just have to educate on those little things so that officers can be really careful about how they're interacting and take into account, if a person's not representing as the gender that their ID says they are, maybe you need to pull them away from the people that they're with before you question them about that. I know you got to identify folks and you've got to do your job, but you got to do it in a way that doesn't make the person you're interacting with unsafe. And so another way you can look at this is through your corrections. So if you're an agency that operates a jail, there are really a lot of jail specific opportunities to be more inclusive. And I know I'm not an expert on corrections, but I know that there's a lot of genderized housing and genderized treatment of inmates and pat downs and searches. So you're going to want to find a trainer that can help you revise your policies and educate people on how to be respectful of LGBTQIA members. For example, asking them, which gender of officer do you prefer to conduct your pat down? That can go a long way. Another improvement is increasing the diversity of your own agency. And that's not just for LGBTQIA people. You've got to increase your gender diversity in general. You've got to hire more women. You've got to hire more people of color. You've got to go out of your way to increase diversity, because anytime there's a group of people who are the same block, the same race, the same gender, the same sexual orientation, you're going to have struggles. So the more diverse your organization is, the stronger it will be for your community. Social media obviously is a great opportunity. Honoring Pride Month, honoring those days that we've spoken about: National Coming Out Day, Transgender Day, Visibility, Harvey Milk Day. There's so many days out there that you can really make social media posts from your agency honoring those days. You can highlight your volunteering efforts. It's really the best way, especially to communicate with younger members of your community, that your agency is doing its best to try. And then including LGBTQIA members on your citizen advisory board like we have, but a lot of agencies have other, like, use of force review boards or disciplinary review boards that include civilian members of the community. Reach out to your LGBTQIA people so that they have a seat at that table, so that they're making decisions and making recommendations about, yeah, that use of force was too much. They have to be part of the process or there can be no solution. So those are the things I could think of. I'm sure that there's a lot more, but I'm really honored that you gave me this opportunity to speak about ways to be more inclusive for our LGBTQIA folks.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I think I've gotten such a wealth of information that I myself am learning, and I hope that everyone who is watching this discussion is also learning quite a bit that they can later implement with their teams. So before you go, I just wanted to let you know that I'm so very appreciative of your time. As I said to you earlier, thank you so much for imparting this information with me and taking the time to speak with me as well. Very appreciative of that.